if you want to use a running metaphor, I've written thousands, literally thousands of newspaper stories. That's the equivalent of running like a 100-meter dash. I've written dozens of magazine articles. That's the equivalent of running a mile. If you're going to write a book, that's the literary equivalent of running a marathon. And you have to be certain of certain things before you're willing to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning, night after night. Writing books is hard enough. You don't want to even go near open windows on the second or third floor of the building in the middle of the road. So you have to stack everything in your favor before you do one interview, before you sleuth through the guts of an archival repository in Kansas or North Dakota. Before you do any of this, you've got to find out as much as you can about this story. And one of the things that you have to find out about this story is, does it have universal themes? Is this a story that has universal themes? Because if it doesn't have universal themes, that's going to be a horrific 27-mile literary marathon. And in the end, it's going to appear on a shelf at some woebegone basement library, ultimately read by 3 people in North America. And what's the point of doing that? So you need to think, is this really a powerful story, and are you the right person to tell it? And if you check off on both of those, then you come to, does this story have a bunch of universal themes that we can braid into a narrative quilt that will get people's attention regardless of their age, regardless of their ethnic group, regardless of their background? And so that was one of the first tests that I applied to this book, when I found out enough about the narrative. And this is traditionally, and many of you can verify this, traditionally you all have been told, we all have been told, well, you want to find books, literature with good universal themes, well then you should read Mr. William Shakespeare. Or you should read Mr. Fyodor Dostoevsky. Or you should read Mr. Ernest Hemingway. But I stand before you now, actually, multiple times. I stand before you now in a semi-bipolar state to tell you definitively that you do not have to schlep across some dreary Scottish moor knocking on the door of a castle. You don't have to trudge down some snowy frozen street in St. Petersburg. You don't have to trundle across some bloody bull ring in Pamplona to find good universal themes. You know why? Because we have them right here. We have this magnificent story that organically sprang up from our own soil. Not dirt, soil. Inside Europe. Of our own country, of our own state. A story that came out of the soil of the Niobrara River a mere 160 miles north of where we are right now. This is a story. I Am a Man, Chief Standing Bear's Journey for Justice. This is a story that's chock-a-block with universal themes. This is a story about love of family. This is a story about love of country, love of homeland. This is a story about honor, courage, integrity, perseverance. Enough universal themes for anybody. On that day that Standing Bear left this hated warm country with the body of his only son, 1 o'clock, January 2nd, 1879. At that point in American history, the government of the United States had signed 371 treaties with the American Indian people. And by January 2nd, 1879, the United States government had broken all 371 treaties. But this 52-year-old man with no winter clothes, no money, no food, a 550-mile walk through 77 below wind chill weather, was not going to break his promise to his son. You can't use that to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning, then you simply need to cash it in and become a claims adjuster at State Farm. There's nothing wrong with being a claims adjuster at State Farm. Hopefully, nobody in here is. But that is something that you got in your hands that you can work with when you've got those kinds of themes. And you need those kinds of themes. So that's one reason I love this story. And I would routinely get up at 3 o'clock in the morning. The second reason I love this story And for those of you who read it, it's just a freak show of great characters, which is another thing you want to evaluate before you start this 2.5-year narrative journey. Do you have a really strong protagonist that you can run the narrative through? Somebody with flesh, blood, muscle, bone, grit, that people can see and hear and smell and taste and touch? Can you activate as many of the senses of your readers as possible with this story, with this protagonist? What kind of characters? It's like you are the director of your own movie. And this is what I tell my writing students all the time. You have to act like you're Bertolucci or Francis Ford Coppola when you're writing. You have to imagine scenes, and you have to activate readers' senses with specific word choices that build word images. And that's what you can do with this story. That's what you can do with this story. And you need good characters. You need good characters. Standing Bear is a magnificent character, but look at the supporting actors around him. You could pick off any of these and write a full-blown biography about the judge. The Indian-hating grizzly bear hunting judge who was in the wilderness hunting for grizzly bears when the trackers found him. Judge Elmer Dundee. Judge Elmer Dundee, the only federal judge in the state of Nebraska in the spring of 1879. Magnificent character. George Crook. Brigadier General George Crook. Maybe after Standing Bear, the most intriguing character in this whole story. The highest ranking military officer west of the Mississippi, who saw from his front porch in late March 1879 this bedraggled group of 30 Ponca coming into the lower parade ground at Fort Omaha, and he was aghast at what he saw. And what he saw were little children and their mothers walking into his fort with bags of blackened skin hanging off their elbows and hanging off their wrists like cellophane sacks full of charred bacon. Skin that had been so severely frostbitten that it was completely dead and just hanging in clubs. Brigadier General George Crook stood there on March 25, 1879 and watched this parade of barely alive people walk into his prison fort. And he had a hellacious decision to make. This is a West Point graduate. This is a Civil War veteran, heavily decorated Civil War veteran, who accepted the Civil War, had spent all of his adult life fighting Indians. And he has sitting on his desk in his office a telegram from his superior in Chicago, Lieutenant General Philip Sheridan, who years earlier had famously said, the only good Indian is a dead Indian. And his orders from his superior were to march these people right back from where they came. They don't want to set any bad examples for all the other tribes in Oklahoma. Oh, Standing Bear gets homesick and he decides to leave, and we can too. So George Crook's orders in late March of 1879 were to turn the bedraggled faces of these people south and march them straight back, which he knew would be a death sentence. So I can imagine him, this resolute military man, looking at this telegram with his orders, looking at these people walking in with this charred black skin hanging from their elbows and wrists. And I can see him on the third floor of this magnificent building at Fort Omaha, engaged in this ferocious internal debate between his military conscience and his civilian conscience. And you can just see that needle wavering back and forth until one night in late March, it tilted ever so slightly toward the civilian side of his conscience. And so he gets dressed, races down, goes to the stable, saddles his horse, drives 3 miles south, knocks on the door of the local offices of the Omaha Daily Herald, which is soon to go into the Omaha World Herald. And it's opened by the assistant editor, a guy named Thomas Henry Tibbles. You can't make these people up. If I was on the most extraordinarily hallucinogenic LSD that Berkeley, California produced, I could not beat the reality of Thomas Henry Tibbles and Judge Dundee and Brigadier General George Crook So Thomas Henry Tillis, this larger-than-life, egomaniac, social justice crusading journalist, opens the door at almost 1 a.m. in late March, and he sees the highest-ranking military man in the western half of the United States standing there, and Brigadier General Crook says, "Tom, I think I've got a story you might be interested in." Now, I've been doing this for 30-plus years. And for 30-plus years, I have been waiting for the highest-ranking military to tweet me, text me, Facebook me, friend me, something. And just say, "Joe, I've got a story I think you're really going to like." It hasn't happened, not holding my breath, but it did happen in March of 1879. The highest-ranking military man, he's involved. The crusading journalist, he's now involved. The grizzly bear hunting, Indian-hating judge is involved. And before long, if any of you were in trouble in Omaha, Nebraska in the spring of 1879, the one person you would want representing you in the court, can't make it up, a guy named Andrew Jackson Poppleton, who was the first lawyer admitted to the bar in Nebraska history, was the former mayor of Omaha, and ironically in the spring of 1879 was the general counsel of the Union Pacific Railroad, the one institution that probably did more to destroy Native culture than anything else. He hears about this 52-year-old father trying to straggle back to the Niobrara to bury his son, and he's intrigued by the story. He's intrigued by the constitutional possibilities. So he asks if he can represent Standing Bear pro bono. Fancy lawyer talk for free. So now, Andrew Jackson Poppleton, the silver-haired, silver-tongued orator, best lawyer in Nebraska, he's representing Standing Bear. The Jewish community in Omaha. In the spring of 1879, the Jewish community of Omaha steps out of the shadows and starts hitting up white people for money to defend an American Indian in federal court. You think that happened every week in the 1800s? It happened once. You've got all these people coming out of the shadows to rally around the flag of this middle-aged Indian chief of a small, obscure tribe. And that's the second thing I love about this story, is just the wonderful characters that help drive